And a happy St. Patrick's to everyone. Thank you for
How do you
joining
do, everybody?
us this evening.
Yeah.
Had you go home and have a nice St. Patrick's Day dinner this evening, Miss Cindy?
I did. What we did is we had cabbage rolls, not corned beef and cabbage, but they were very delicious, and finished it up with, get this, a shamrock shake.
Fancy.
Woo!
Not so traditional, but
No.
I don't know why I love this holiday so much, but it is a fun one to celebrate. And I'm curious, because we're foodies, I'm curious to hear what, in the chat section, perhaps what people are eating at home this evening. Maybe they've got corned beef going, or
your sister and brother-in-law had a nice corned beef and cabbage going first thing this morning before school started. So good for them.
Good for them.
Yeah.
Well, this evening we're getting together and we're going to be discussing chapters 25 through 32 of the Indigo Girl.
Yeah, it was great reading again. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and here we go. Learning more about the history and the Slave Act, and Sarah. It's like I can't put it down. Although I've got a couple other books started, and I have to sort of balance
juggle them back and forth.
This is such a great read.
Maybe it's good because it puts the brakes on it. Many of us have been commenting over the last few weeks about how it's hard to pump those brakes when it's time to stop at the designated chapter each week. But as we enter into chapter 25, Eliza and her family find herself on one of their designated trips out to see the Pinckneys. But this time it's very much with an understanding that social sort of engagements may not produce any sort of suitors anytime soon after the events of the last chapters.
Eliza sort of put herself in a bad position there as far as suitors go, but she's stood her claim and she said, I am not marrying that Mr. Lawrence. He's a jerk. And good for her.
Yeah. I sort of felt as I was reading this, I'm like, maybe she just somehow bought herself some extra time because she's been kind of putting off wanting to enter into the marriage or courtship act for a while. And so maybe this was just what she needed to buy herself some time and really get things going at the plantation.
But could you feel the pressure happening? The indigo is starting to turn out there in the fields, and she's been invited to this king's ball.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh my gosh, what if it all happens on the same day?
At the same time.
At the same time that I have to stay behind. And
she's a smart girl, though, because she's using this time with the Pinckneys to plug, of course, Charles' ear and find out really where she stands with the new Negro Act. And this was something that we covered last week on some of the excerpts from the Carolina Act. And I'm going to have Deb put this back in the chat section again if you wanted to read up on the full run of it and all the amendments that came along with it. But really what she's interested to know from Charles is that the education for her slaves, she's still feeling really remorseful about the fact that Quash and Togwa have figured out that Ben knows how to read, and they're questioning why they were never taught.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
But she's smart about this, right? And one of the things that he brings up is this excerpt of the Negro Act, where it says in so many words that absolutely you can teach them, or you cannot teach them how to write. Write, write, write. It says nowhere
Ah,
in the language that a person could not teach an individual to read. And she's already sort of stated it might be difficult to learn one without the
without the
other.
other. Hmm.
So
Clever girl.
she's sort of found herself a nice little loophole in this act, at least for the meantime, so that if anyone were to find out, it says, well, you never told me that I couldn't teach them how to read the Bible so that they can go to God when times are tough, right?
And the next chapter coming up, you find out a little bit more about her mother. And I know it's another generation, but her mother is just aghast that her daughter Eliza wants to teach these slaves to
Right.
read and write. And why would you want to do something like that?
Right.
You're just going to allow them to have full access to have another revolution.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and what her mom, I think, is doing is following what most folks do, which is listening what to others say, versus Eliza, who forms her own ideas of how the world should be. It
Sure.
really stands back and looks at the perspective of, yeah, this isn't right that I should have this advantage, and if you weren't taught to read, you also would be ignorant.
That's right. That's
It has nothing to do
Yeah.
with the genes within us. But, when she returns back, she has an opportunity to talk to Ben. And Ben has basically pulled her aside and points out to her the patterns of the indigo. I don't know if you recall this or not, but I thought that he explained this so poetically in their growth pattern.
That's true, and how it grows and indigo grows makes me want to go out there and just say, what does this plant actually look like? I
Yeah.
hope you folks all found the same thing. Like, get
Yeah.
online and see. Does Japanese indigo differ from other indigos,
Exactly.
or how does it compare even to woad?
Yeah.
Yeah. What's the deal about
Yeah.
the growth pattern of the leaves of the indigo?
So this is a great shot. For those of you who have never been around densely planted indigo, you can really see how they utilize every open space so that they can each get equal amounts of sunlight. And Ben describes it in so many words that not everything has to be perfect, but man, look how perfect they really are. And
yeah,
I don't know. This is where the romance of the historic novel comes into play. But
Yeah.
it's true, and it shows his passion for the plant.
And I've never seen it growing like that. I don't know if any of your viewers have ever grown it in abundance. I mean, I had a small patch in my
Sure.
backyard growing, but this is fantastic. Although I do remember our friend Jean Frett
Yes.
down in Chester County. Went to visit her one day, and she had rows and rows of different varieties of indigo. And folks, it was truly beautiful, something to really see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, at the same moment, when they're looking at the indigo, there's some awkward moments that happen between she and Ben where the natural intimacy of their previous friendship comes through. Their childhood, they would engage with each other without any sort of boundaries. But now, people are starting to notice how closely they stand and the fact that they touched hands. Everything seems to be falling apart, I
She
think.
waxed him with a pine cone, I think, in
Yeah.
one of the chapters again.
Right.
And it's just like, well, that's when we were children, but
Yeah. I think she
we
still
have a
longs for
difference
that.
now.
Yeah.
She longs for it, and
Yeah.
he has to say, you know what, I am.
Well, his
your
life
servant.
changed dramatically from the time he was a child to when he was actually sold and became a man. Life is very different from his perspective, and so he doesn't. And there's a lot more consequences for him reaching out for that sort of engagement, even a friendship or talking as equals. There's much more consequences for him to engage that way.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah, well, mom's putting the heat on, right? So we talk about her coming back and sort of taking note. Like all of a sudden, she's noticing what's happening around the farm.
So I'm a little uncomfortable with what I see going
Yeah.
around, and Liza has to just sort of let her know that,
Sure.
well, there's nothing really going on. He's just a friend.
Well, that, and so she rolls into it then, but she's also like making observations about the farm and how it's operating as well.
That's true.
That she's like, wait, we have a schoolroom? We're teaching people to read here? Did you know that was illegal? And
yes, I did.
yes, I did. And Mom, did you also know that all these other absurd things, like they can't go to church, or they
Play an
can't, or
instrument.
play an
Yeah.
instrument, or
How
they
crazy
can't
is that?
wed? And her mom goes, well, that's just absurd. And I think her mom finally sees, like, we're being safe. Nobody is out to just sort of hunt us down and turn us in, but we're going to keep it under wraps, keep
But
it
mother
quiet.
is definitely sheltered and clearly doesn't know, probably about the Negro Act and what is forbidden.
For hearsay, for sure.
Yeah.
Whatever has been talked around the women's parlors as they're socializing, that's trickled down from the men in their lives. I mean, none of them, I'm sure, have sourced out a copy to read it verbatim, as we have the opportunity
because
to
it
do
just
today.
wasn't their part of the whole operation of that plantation.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Now, in this same chapter 27, the vats are almost ready, and they're starting to test the water. And
did you folks find that there's most interesting thing, testing the water stove for temperature?
For temperature.
Yeah.
And not just touching it. We're not just splishing it. It's not like getting in the pool like, is this going to be a tiptoe in or jump right in? They're really testing it. And Ben basically says, you need to feel it at your pulse. You need to really submerge your hand way down in there at a depth and feel it where your heartbeat is.
And then go a little deeper and see what the temperatures are at that point. All I could think about is I have this very fancy schmancy digital thermometer that I use when testing a roast in the oven. And they're using their hand and going in there and go, it's a little too cool yet. So we need to heat this up. And how are we going to do that?
Well, I pulled this picture because this whole scene made me think of the first time I saw an electric teapot that had variable temperatures on it. This was something that was pretty new to me. I think I was in college when I was introduced to it. But we have found through the science of making tea and like hundreds of years of tradition that different teas need to be steeped at different temperatures to really give it the benefit or the fullest flavor or not make it too bitter. And I'm sure that just like our folks here in the story, Ben, who has all this experience, knows that it has to be the perfect temperature or they might be doing this for nothing.
That's right.
Yeah. Do you remember your mom? This always baffled my mind. His mom was a wonderful cook, but she used to cook over in the summer kitchen. I remember her testing to see if the stove was hot enough based on how it sizzled when water hit it.
Water hit it.
Yeah.
And she always claimed that, she was so proud of herself. And she goes, I know it's going to take 3 pieces of wood to bake a loaf of bread. So, I mean, she had temperature control
in a different way.
On a cook stove, on an old wooden cook stove.
I'm sure many of you at home may comment in the section below if you have, stories of your grandmothers or your mothers or even yourselves cooking in this way.
Well, if you frequent cooking shows, they'll often say your oven temperature may vary. And so you really need to have a little thermometer hanging in there. And my mother would open up that big heavy door and stick her hand in there and go, yep, that's about ready for a pie. And then shut it. And she knew to add either another stick of wood or let it cool down a little bit so it wouldn't burn the crust. Just an amazing woman. I wish I had paid more attention to that.
Well, that's an individual who knows it as an art form rather than a calculated science, right? And so it's an intuition.
But even from my own experience with Indigo, I'm always using thermometers and things like that to check the temperature.
Yeah.
But they were doing well, it's not, quite the right temperature. Let's get some bricks out of the fire and throw it in there because that'll help to heat it up a little bit.
We're not even there yet. I mean, they're really thinking ahead because they're using purely solar power. It's not like a modern brewer where they have some nice coils at the bottom to control the temperature. They're relying on these huge vats to be heated by the sun, and then they cool down at night a little bit, and then they're heated again, and then they cool down. And so they're basically giving it time to get to that temperature while they're waiting for it to get to just the right temperature. Yeah. Now, the last sort of thing that follows this chapter is she finally has Quash coming into the house for private lessons.
Oh yeah, coming into the library.
Yeah,
wow.
That's pretty spectacular. Now, I don't know if Mom observes this happening or not, but I think this is a really big deal because she's bringing into her personal private home, and unless you're a servant within the home, that was not heard of.
No, can you imagine Quash? I mean, he lives in a wooden house out at the end of the field.
Sure.
And he comes in, and all of a sudden, he's just surrounded with all these beautiful things and niceties and chairs with cushions and things like that.
Now,
I'm sure you.
comparative to what moms used to, back at the manor in Antigua or back in
Right.
England, this is probably bare bones living, but for them, it
Them,
was
it
probably
was
total opulence. Yeah.
sure.
So
I'm
I'm
glad she
curious to see
invited
how
you,
it
but
goes in. Yeah.
yeah.
Now, as we go into chapter 28, this is where Cromwell starts to talk to Eliza about having enough hands on deck for the harvest.
Yeah.
There's been a really big
A little bit of tension going
miscommunication.
on here. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So here's where we start to sort of see Cromwell a little clearer. I mean, we're getting a sense for him, but he's squirming a little bit. He's like, "Oh, well, I just assumed because you spend so much time with the field hands that they relayed this information to you," and tries
Right.
to sort of pin it off on Ben, even though all along he doesn't want Ben to really have credit for anything. He's
At
the
all.
master indigo maker.
Mm-hmm.
So now Eliza's sort of reeling at, how are we going to make this happen? She might not even be here for the harvest, and now you're telling me we don't have enough people on hand?
Right.
So,
But she's willing to just jump in there and help and start to cut
yeah, that's exactly right.
and harvest all of this.
Yeah. But in the meantime, she's having these conversations with Ben on the side, like, what do you think? Is it going to come? Is it not going to come? And Ben's belief is it's not going to really come before she has to leave for the King's Ball.
Can you imagine her showing up at the King's Ball with blue fingernails?
I know. Can you imagine?
Harvesting all of this. Yeah.
You'll have to excuse me. I'm experimenting a bit out on the plantation.
That's right.
Yeah.
My mother's so proud of me.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I sort of took interest to as they're having this conversation, she's very worried, like, I'm not going to be here. And he basically clutches that little leather pouch that he has around his neck. And they really draw attention, or excuse me, Natasha Boyd really draws attention to this scene. And he basically murmurs something to the effect of, like, I got this, or I'm going to take care of things.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it. And that got me thinking, like, why did Natasha make such a big deal over this leather pouch around his neck? So I started doing some research on what this could possibly be. And I found an interesting sort of thread about something called a gree-gree, or a talisman. And this was something that was commonplace within voodoo and some African other traditions that can bring either evil or bring luck. And for many of these West African countries, this was commonplace. Now, I also found a follow-up to that because I wanted to know where gree-gree came from. And I am not by any means knowledgeable in voodoo, but I found this wonderful paragraph in here where they talk about the term gree-gree coming from the French gray, because it can be a mix of black and white magic. And I really thought that was sort of interesting because, we're starting to see all of these hintings that Sarah practices some sort of magic or was a healer of some sort. We're not exactly sure. But seems like she's a little bit more on the dark side. But the fact that he's clenching this and says, I've got this, sort of makes me feel that maybe he's putting hope or putting prayers or things within the interior patch that he believes will be beneficial to the luck of their harvest.
Interesting.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting, too.
I've been looking at these chapters and this whole idea of this little leather pouch. And I can remember, and probably you do too as a child,
Sure.
Rip Mann, a bowl maker, he would wear one. And I asked him what it was, and he's called a possibles bag. But I think it was, more of French and Indian war times. But I mean, we're talking about the same sort of
I think
time
you're
period.
right. I think a
But
lot of
what's
those.
in that bag?
I think it's whatever you put in it. It's sort of like making a charm bag. And it could have been bones. It could have been pieces of sand. I don't know. But the idea is that you're putting something, and it's the practice of carrying it with you. Perhaps what Rip was talking about trickled from sort of these Cajun, South Carolina, up through Appalachia, up into modern times.
I thought,
if anybody knows more,
like
please share with us. It's very interesting, but without anyone to lean to in our fold who's an expert on this, I hate to advise any more on it, but I'm thinking that's where Natasha was leading us.
I love it. Yeah,
I agree. Now, very shortly after this, she has a spare sort of window of time where she gets up and she decides to go out and investigate her stand of live oaks.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that what a great thing to sort of like go back and reflect on, because it was the first passion project she had before her dad left. And these little saplings are coming up, and she is still dreaming about the future, because remember, these trees are slow growing.
It's hard to imagine, when you're 16, 17 years old, that you are thinking about planting something that you will profit from in the future.
Sure.
And when you make comparisons, it's a little bit like telling your newly graduated college graduate, this is your first job, and I know you're excited about this, but you need to be putting away 10-15% of this salary into your retirement. You go, retirement, that is 45 years from now. Why do I need to do that? She's very, very bright, thinking those live oaks are going to benefit our family.
And for this time period, it would almost be unreasonable to assume you would live that long to see it come to fruition.
That's true.
I mean, it's not uncommon for people to die in their 40s or 30s in this period.
And when they made the comment about some of these trees, maybe they're 1,000 years old, that it would take maybe 4 people hand in hand to even surround the girth of that tree.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
How
Isn't that
majestic
amazing?
This tree must be.
Yeah. I have an interesting article that I want to share with all of you. And this is coming from a website called artsandscience.southcarolina.edu. We're going to link this in the comments section. But what's interesting about this article is it's a modern piece from 1993 where they were talking about a restoration of an old ship.
Mm-hmm.
And it was important for them to use things that would have been historically accurate. So they're going back to the live oaks and supporting this theme that Natasha has interwoven into this book. But they also give a background history. And one of the things that is worth noting in here is that the live oak is not actually a true oak, but a semi-evergreen and member of the beech family. So it's a very coastal type tree. And this article goes on and on and on. And look, we're looking right here in the 1740s. Ships in the southeast were being advertised as an emphasis on the live oak because their construction was so strong and long-standing.
Wow. Sarah, that's interesting.
It's very interesting. So there are several pages here that kind of goes through the history of shipbuilding and these live oaks here in the United States. So again, Natasha did a great job of doing her research and finding things that would have been happening right in their backyard.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Gosh.
Isn't that wonderful?
I remember years ago, now this doesn't pertain to live oaks, and that's what our story is about, but friends of ours had gone down to the Baltimore harbor, and they were doing restoration on one of those early clipper ships, but they weren't using live oak timbers. What they were using is Osage orange.
Oh, that's right.
And the Osage orange, they went in there, and here they're using these bright yellow timbers.
Yes.
Because of the shape and also the flexibility and the strength that was in. But as they're talking to these woodworkers, at their feet are piles and piles and piles of sawdust. And they said, "Can I have the sawdust?" And they go, "Well, yeah,
sure.
What do you want that for?"
Sure.
It's a dye material.
Yeah.
And so it gives you bright yellow dyes that are fast. They're not fugitive dyes. They're very fast.
Really, really easy too.
And easy to use. Yeah.
We actually, speaking of Osage orange, I don't know if you saw the shipment of shuttles that came in this week from Bluster Bay.
Yeah.
Oh, make me swoon. But Terry Laval, who's the owner of Bluster Bay Shuttles, he sent in a few that were made out of Osage orange. And they are like lemon yellow. They're so beautiful. Yeah. I'm looking forward to seeing who picks those up. All right. So let's move on. So as we continue on, guess what? It's time to go and start harvesting.
Yeah.
It's happened. And it happened before she had to head to the ball.
Well, that's good.
Yeah. And how does she know it's happening? I love this. The chapter starts off, she kind of gets up, and what does she hear? What does she hear?
She hears the singing of the slaves out in the fields.
That's right. Yeah. And for me, that was sort of like the equivalent of like the same feeling of like hearing the drums at the beginning when the first revolt happened. But it's a different sound. It doesn't seem as fearful, and she knows it's happening. They're all up and it's going down. For those of you who are interested, and I know we have a lot of folks in our fold who really, really love music. I found a PBS special that is now up on YouTube for you guys to view. It's called The Slave Songbook, and it's the origins of spiritual music in the South. And they talk in this piece, I'm not sure if you're going to be able to hear this or not, but they talk in the piece about it becoming part of the culture.
Life of hard labor on plantations. These slave work songs, laments, and shouts of protest evolve into a new musical form, the spiritual.
So this is a really wonderful short piece. It's about 17 minutes, 18 minutes. I'll put it in the chat section for you guys to check out. But it goes through the whole story of bringing these songs of work from the field into the churches, and it's sort of being the foundation for some of the spiritual music that we know today, that evolved into jazz music and other forms.
Fantastic.
Good piece. So make sure that you check that out.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. The other thing that they're talking about now are our indigo vats, because as the harvest is happening, temperatures coming up, and the vats are being prepared. Well, I had some curiosity as to what these vats actually look like, because if you see pictures of modern dye houses, and we explored some of those last book club, these are really different from what we know. And again, South Carolina has a really great treasure trove of historical photos. And this one is coming from their Department of Archives and History. Now, you'll have to click on these individual hyperlinks here, but each of them will give you a view of a authentic period piece of what indigo vats would have looked like at the time. And this is from a plantation in South Carolina. So this is the front view, and you can see that sort of when they describe them crawling up ladders to the top, you can see why that would be necessary. And these small doors that allow the liquids to move from one vat to the other. And here's a nice side view. It's pretty deceiving when you go from the front view to the back view. Let me try and make this a little bit. They're very quite tall. There you go. You can sort of see the depth of it in the scale. And they actually have built-in concrete steps for the tourists to look at them. So there's more information in the articles, and here you can see the openings. They've done a concrete wash over the bricks, probably to give it some more longevity and water less water permeability with the bricks. So I highly encourage you to check this out, because it's a really interesting article, and you can get a closer look to see what exactly Quash and Togo were building alongside them. And most likely, again, this technology probably came right from Antigua. The white settlers would not have come up with this on their own, because they're so similar to what you're still finding in those regions.
Homemade, hand-fired bricks.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah, today we would use stainless steel.
Yeah.
Like a brewery. But
Now, there's one thing that I want to sort of throw in here. This is one of those obscure things that I found on the internet. Thank you, internet. But this is a piece that was actually published, I believe, at Michigan State University. Yes, University of Michigan. It's an old archive, and somewhere in the midst of this article about trying to reduce down mercury, they are talking about the indigo industry. And this is a scale model. If you can read the writing on the right-hand side, it says 2 pumps in a frame worked by a pendulum to pump water into the fill in the scratchy blank. C describes the beater. This is where they would have beat the pulp. Then they would have had a vat of lime water up here and a tub to receive it. And down here at the very bottom, it says this is the recommended setup for every 6 or 7 acres you plant of indigo. This, in some ways, they're now writing back to sort of say, this is what we're going to need. And so I just thought it was kind of fun to see this little blueprint.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah, it's sort of like what you might find in your modern day, what do I want to say, Mother Earth news, where they're making something and they're teaching everyone how to use it. So again, this will be right down there in your chat section, so you can check it out. And let's see. Oh, and this believe it or not, the original publishing of this was a British gentleman's magazine where they would have relayed things back to England of what was happening here in the colonies, probably mostly to pique people's interest of what are those crazies doing there.
And what an interesting operation there.
Right.
But to build it from nothing.
Right.
It's just amazing.
Right. I agree.
Able to succeed with this.
Yeah. So they do a little arguing. Cromwell's ready to jump in. It's harvest time. Let's go. Let's go. And Ben's pumping the brakes, and he's not quite sure to say no. Like, it is not time to go. And they get into a little bit of an argument of it because it's making him look like a bit of a jerk in front of Eliza. But he can't let it go. He can't let the entire harvest go to waste.
Because it could be ruined.
Because it could be completely ruined. And what would be the point of all that effort of just harvesting all day long? So as Cromwell kind of stomps back to the house, they decide to warm it up a little bit.
And grab some bricks and throw it in there and get that water temperature just where it needs to be.
That's just perfect. I think it was such a brilliant solution. And I forget that during these time periods, sometimes the simplest, easiest solutions are all you need. There's no panicking. It doesn't matter if your heater element is broken. We'll just throw some bricks in there. It's fine.
Well, especially since your heater element is, the sun.
Yeah.
And you don't have a fire built underneath this.
Exactly.
I thought it was ingenious.
I did too. Yeah. Now, unfortunately, she got a chance to be a part of this, but she got to head off to the ball, which is, it's okay. She's still excited. It's the king's birthday. And remember, we're not a country yet. We're still under British rule.
That's right. And you can't miss it because this is an opportunity to chit-chat with a number of people, including the people that she's hoping to help her with the indigo.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So while she's gone, they're going to have to go through the beating process and the making of the cakes. And hopefully when she returns, there will be beautiful cakes of indigo waiting for her.
That they can sell.
That's the plan anyway, right? But while she's there at the ball, she can't help herself. She's got to do shop talk, and she finds herself, of course, among the men and hearing rumors from the women. Of course, she hears it first from the women, the rumor mill, that there is some major changes happening in the area. And Charles Pinckney got himself in trouble because he spoke out on this sort of devaluation of their currency. Yeah. And this is a really stressful point for Eliza.
She doesn't know she's going to lose her plantations.
Right.
Because of this.
Yeah. I have to admit, and this is more than ignorance on my part because this is not something that is commonly studied unless you're in the industry. But as far as devaluing money, this is something that we don't often see it on a regular basis to the scale that we're talking, that to the point that it would be worth nothing at all. So I had to do some additional research of what it actually meant for these folks to have their money devalued. And in colonial states, there was a lot going on, and it was very confusing to figure out how much something was worth. Now, the units in colonial times could have been pounds, shillings, and pence. So they're taking this right from what they knew in Britain. However, there were other local units from state to state. So if you were trading across borders or you were traveling, it became very confusing. So the amount of sterlings in Pennsylvania could be very different than what it is in South Carolina. So if you're interested in more information about this, this is a really wonderful article that sort of helped me better understand what was going on all the way up into like the mid 1800s. I'm also going to include this article as well, which is about the value of money. And they talk about like even reading the history of money and how reading the account books, you have to almost really have a strong comprehension of what that monetary system meant in that individual state. I don't know, like it seems like it would have been a very confusing time, and I could see why folks would be anxious to establish a uniform currency system. Yeah.
And, some of this goes back with this idea of money all the way to Roman times.
Oh, yeah, that's absolutely right.
When you first, have a coin, it might even be in the earliest times, a stone or something like that. And then all of a sudden you've got silver or you have gold. Yeah. And then they put, like some of those early coins with Caesar's face on it.
Oh, sure.
You know, I mean, we're talking. This goes back a long time.
Coins have
and
been
then,
going back forever and ever.
Yeah.
Yeah, the little sweet Chinese coins with the holes in the center. Yeah. Now, I do have to say, though, as much as she's having fun at the ball, she's hearing all these whispers behind the back against the king. You're like, she's like, at his own birthday?
Yeah.
But she's starting to see how absurd some of these doctrines coming across the pond really are. But Charles has some good news for her at the ball. He might actually have a hookup for her when she lets him know, guess what? They're harvesting back at the
And-
plantation. He said, I might have a hookup for you. Let me get in touch with some folks. And if a buyer can be lined up, that changes the whole game.
The plantations are going to be saved.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
It's one thing for her to put all this work and money and effort, let alone the sweat into this operation. But if you don't have anybody to buy the product, you're not making any money. You can't eat it, that's for sure. So he's given her a little bit of ray of sunshine. And so she bounds back to the plantation, excited to see what's going on.
Yeah. So it makes me think, what are the next chapters going to be involved? Are they going to sell the indigo? Who's buying it?
Yeah, for her, it's a long paddle back to the plantation. I think I had read that it was about 6 miles for her back from Charleston to the plantation. And it made me think about them, thinking, they're paddling 6 miles. And I don't know if the headwaters are flowing inwards. I would assume they're flowing out. But I looked it up, and you can kayak. If you're a pretty accomplished kayaker, you can kayak about a mile in every half an hour. So, I mean, if they had strong rowers, it would have still taken them more than 3 hours to get from town back to the house.
That explains an awful lot.
4
Like when
hours.
somebody would come to your home
Sure.
For a visit, they would often say, oh, would you like to spend the evening and go back tomorrow?
Yeah.
If it takes 3 hours to get out there from Charleston.
Yeah, I agree. And, sometimes I think I have to consider those things because we looked at pictures of the Wapu. It's a huge river, huge river. And if they're paddling up or downstream, it's going to take longer, depending on when they're going against the headwaters. But imagine that whole boat ride back. She's sitting there with her mother, and they're having this awkward conversation about how she is so embarrassed by the fact that she was hearing rumors about this whole exchange back at the farm. And she probably will never have a suitor. And I'm imagining this long boat ride back, getting an earful the whole way. All the while, she's just, I just want to get back. I want to see if the cakes are ready. And she gets back to find that Ben and Cromwell have had a serious throwdown. And there's apparently no indigo. And, of course, that's where they drop us off. And I'm holding my breath. It is so hard for me to not talk more about this at this point. But her life is such a roller coaster ride. I don't.
Yeah. Coming back, I'm thinking about that boat ride, 3 hours back with mother who was just irate about what's going on.
Yeah.
And, they need the sale of that indigo. And
they do. They do. And I think I'm holding hope. I mean, we know historically Eliza makes a big success of herself, but when you're living in that moment with her and you're living every success, every failure, you're holding your breath for her to find out if it's going to work. I get that. I started a business and knowing if it's going to work or not, and you've got your home on the line, that's a really big deal.
Right.
It's a really big deal. So I feel for Eliza. Now, as we sort of enter into next week's chapters, we're going to find out what happened back while she was at the King's Ball.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you've read ahead, don't let us know.
Don't put it in the comments section.
Yeah.
Don't ruin it for the people who are good and don't read ahead.
Yeah.
Well, I hope you have a good rest of your evening. Tomorrow we've got color theory going on here at the studio and some Zoomers
Students
at home.
have come in this evening, and I know one has already gone through the studio, and she is so excited about seeing those warps all set up.
All those rainbow warps.
And how many do you have online?
Oh gosh, don't ask me. I think I've got 4 or 5 online. So we'll be doing in person and Zoom tomorrow.
Yeah.
You've got chain warping at the end of the week. I've got to talk with Fresno on the weekend.
And shout out to Fresno, Carol. I think you're probably watching this evening out
I think
there.
she was, yeah.
Yeah. So it's all good.
It is all good. We'll just keep chugging along. I hope all of you are enjoying the spring weather that's coming along, and we look forward to seeing you guys here next week at the same time.
Yeah, take care. Have a good weekend
So
coming
long,
up, and we'll see you
everyone.
next Wednesday.
See
Good night.
ya.